In general, it's really true that people don't like rules. They just don't. We just don't like to follow rules very much. And now, how many of you, when you were kids, said something like, well, I can't wait to grow up, because when I grow up, nobody's going to tell me what to do. Okay? So, now I'm not going to ask if you're a kid if you've ever said that, but if you've grown up, and now, for those of you who have grown up, how's that working out for you? Okay? In every area of life, no matter what it is that we do, every area of life, there are rules that we have to follow. And it doesn't matter what it is that we're doing, where it is we go. Even if you work for yourself, even if you're self-employed, you still have to follow rules. You know, we're coming up to that time, I hate to tell you this, in a couple months, where one of the rules we got to do is we got to pay taxes. You know, and there's things that happens to us if we decide not to do that. And so you know, if you're driving in a car, there are rules. Every job, every sport, every art, every skill has rules that you have to know and you have to follow in order to do that job or play that sport or learn that skill or do that art. Whatever it is we do, there are some rules to follow. So if you think about that, think about driving. And if you remember when you were first learning to drive, and going back and what that was like to go and learn how to drive, or have you ever helped a teenager learn how to drive when they get their permit? That's an experience. I've never actually been on that end of it. I do remember being on the other end of it when I got my permit, and I don't know what it is, I always liked to go with my mom, not my dad so much. Because I think he was convinced I was going to kill somebody before, stop, you know, all that kind of thing. So there are dozens, maybe even hundreds of rules to learn and to follow just to drive a car. And so you remember when you first got into that driver's seat, one of the first times that you really are learning how to do that, and you sit down in the driver's seat, get ready to go somewhere, and it was like a pilot going through that pre-flight checklist to make sure that you do all those things right. You got to adjust the mirrors, you got to put your seatbelt on, you got to adjust your seat right, you got to make sure that you can see out of all the mirror angles, you've got to make sure that the car is engaged, that the brake is engaged, you got to turn the thing on, you got to make sure that nobody's coming at you, and that you've got it actually in forward or reverse, depending on which way you want to go. All those things you have to do. Check the gauges and everything, and then and you got to look for the oncoming traffic signal, all those things. And they're just to drive, there are a bunch of rules of the road that you have to know. And all you want to do is go to school or go to the store or something like that, but you had to remember all those kind of things. It kind of becomes second nature after a while, and you don't even think about it. But you got to know these road rules. And we take tests to know what the road rules are, so we know when we're out driving, we know what to do. So here are some actual road rules from different states to keep in mind as you're planning your upcoming summer road trips. You might want to keep these things in mind if you're going to go to these particular states. For instance, in Little Rock, Arkansas, no person shall sound the horn on a vehicle at any place where cold drinks or sandwiches are served after 9 p.m. Decades ago, it was illegal for a woman to drive down Main Street in Waynesboro, Virginia, without her husband walking in front of the vehicle waving a red flag. That was on the books, that's true. In Montana, it's illegal to leave a sheep unescorted in a truck. In Oregon, it's perfectly acceptable to make a left turn on red as long as you're turning onto a one-way street. In Minnesota, it's illegal to cross state lines with a duck on your head. There's no word, though, whether chickens are okay. In Tennessee, it has a law that prohibits shooting at animals from a car unless that animal happens to be a whale. So if you see a whale going along the side of the road in Tennessee, by all means, go at it. In San Francisco, car wash owners are restricted from drying off vehicles with used underwear. And all God's people said, ew. so the point is, whatever you do in life, wherever you go, there are rules that you have to know and have to follow in order to do whatever it is that you want to do. So last week we started looking at the idea of following Jesus. Not just believing in him, not just being a church member, and not just being part of a religion, but following him as a person. That he calls all of us to be his disciples. And we looked at the mission of our church and the reason why we're here, following on and incorporating the actual mission of the United Methodist Church. We have adopted that officially as our mission as well. And our mission is okay, that's good. We really need to know that. I mean, we really need to, when someone asks you what the mission of this church is, to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And so those aren't just nice things to say, but those become then our major operating principles about why we do what we're doing. So we looked at the fact that the word disciple is kind of a lost word for us. We don't use that word much anymore other than outside of church circles. And so we use the word apprentice, which is basically the same thing. As someone who has, an apprentice is someone who, in order to learn a skill or a job or an art form or a sport or whatever, finds a master teacher and then learns the lifestyle of whatever it is that they're wanting to learn from that master teacher. And so an apprentice or a disciple of Jesus is a person who has set themselves on a way of life, a course of life, that helps us to learn how to obey Jesus in everything he said. So the church then is to be a community of people at various levels of spiritual development that is constantly helping others to become disciples or apprentices of Jesus, wherever they are, whether they are even all the way from unbelievers to seekers to half-believers to people who are just kind of on the fringe, all the way moving them to become fully formed disciples of Jesus. And we're all at different levels there. We are constantly helping people to develop a lifestyle of learning how to obey Jesus in everything he said. And if we do that in our own lives, that becomes our goal in life, is to learn how to obey Jesus in everything he said. And if we become a community of people who are helping people all along the way to become apprentices of Jesus, that will transform the world. So an apprentice attaches themselves to a master teacher to learn a job or a sport or an art form or any skill. We attach ourselves to Jesus as our master teacher and ask him to help us to learn how to obey him in everything he said, and through the power of the Holy Spirit, he does that. So an apprentice learns the rules of the trade, or the rules of the art, or the rule of the skill, or the sport, or whatever it is, and we need to learn the rules of what it means to follow Jesus. And so we see those worked out in today's gospel reading. So the story opens up with Jesus, and he's on the road from the place of his baptism, which is likely on the Jordan River near the Dead Sea. Somewhere around that area where the Jordan River flows down past the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is the lowest spot on the face of the earth. The Dead Sea is a place where it's called that because nothing lives in it. Because there's such a high concentration of minerals there in the water that nothing can live in it. You also cannot sink in it. You automatically go in and you float. I've been there. And he's going from there, which is the southernmost part of Israel, at the Dead Sea, along the Jordan River, which obviously flows between Israel and Jordan. And he's going back to Galilee in the north, which is his home territory. And the road running along the Jordan was the main north-south route through that region. And so Jesus and his people would have crossed it many times on their way to and from Jerusalem for the various Jewish festivals and feasts. And they would have gone from the Galilee in the north down to Jerusalem, which is towards the south, heading towards the Dead Sea. He was baptized by John and ordained for his mission. And now he's traveling north with Andrew and Simon Peter, who are his first two disciples. And even though his destination is to go back to the Galilee in the north, we know that Jesus had a much longer journey in mind than just going from the Jordan River up to Galilee. In Bethsaida, which is the hometown of Andrew and Peter, Jesus meets two men to whom he's also going to teach the rules of the trade. And he looks at 3 rules to which everyone, ever since then, who has been asked to obey if they're going to become disciples or apprentices of Jesus. In fact, we could argue that these are the most important rules ever. Rule number 1, follow. Jesus says to them, follow me. We're going to look at this first rule in a lot more detail next week of what it means to follow Jesus. But for now, it's important to notice that it's always said in the imperative. In other words, it's not a suggestion. Jesus doesn't say, well, you might want to follow me if you got nothing better to do. It's not a request. It's a command. Follow me. It's not simply believe in me. Jesus never said, believe in me. Jesus never said, think about me. Jesus never said, consider me. He said, follow me. To be a disciple of Jesus is to leave the road that you were on and take a narrow, one-way road behind him. And Philip is the first to hear this rule in St. John's Gospel. Although we hear Jesus using those 2 simple words over and over again throughout the other 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, this is the first time that Jesus has said it in John's Gospel. And unlike in those other stories where the disciples, when Jesus comes and says, follow me, they drop their nets, or they get up from the table and they start following in behind Jesus immediately. Philip, though, his first response when he's commanded to follow me is to go and get another follower. This invitation was so compelling to him, where Jesus says to him, follow me, that Philip recognizes that it's one that everybody needs to hear in order to become an apprentice of Jesus and join in his work of bringing in the kingdom. It's so important that he goes out and finds somebody else. The first person Philip tells is Nathanael. And interestingly enough, Nathanael doesn't appear in any of the other gospel lists of the 12. So some say that Nathanael had another name, Bartholomew. Literally, the son of Bartholomew. Because the name Bartholomew doesn't appear in John's Gospel. And the name Nathanael doesn't appear in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But whatever the case, Jesus' point might be that Jesus' command to follow me isn't just for those original 12 disciples, but it's for everyone. Philip immediately sees that Jesus is the one about whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote. Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth. So in other words, Philip is saying that Jesus is the one to whom all the ancient scriptures point. But Nathanael hears that the Messiah, we found the Messiah, Jesus, son of Joseph of Nazareth. He hears that, and he thinks that's about as likely as seeing a whale going along the road in Tennessee. He says, he kind of sticks his nose up in the air and he says, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Well, that's kind of harsh. But we need to understand in that culture, in their culture in Israel, the rednecks came from the north. Unlike in our culture. The rednecks come from the north. The Galilee was considered to be the place where the Hicks came from. Not very sophisticated people lived in the Galilee. At least that's what they thought around Jerusalem, which was the urban center. And so Nazareth was even worse because nobody actually is from Nazareth. Nazareth was a town in a culture where everybody is so set on knowing what their background is and their family history was and their place where they're from. Nazareth was the place where a lot of blue-collar workers in their culture would go and would leave their hometowns and go to live in this community called Nazareth where nobody was really from. Nobody was, their ancestors did not go all the way back to Nazareth. In fact, in some maps of the time, Nazareth didn't even appear on the map. And so it's it's likely that Joseph, who was a worker, we say carpenter, but he was actually more or less a stonemason because nobody built their houses out of wood, or he was an artisan. In that culture, he was a blue-collar worker, would have gone finding work to live in Nazareth. And so if you were from there, you were considered to be, by the sophisticated people, not really that great. You were away from your culture and from your hometown and from your family. And so the idea was nothing good can come out of Nazareth. So following Jesus means picking one direction, or better, one person to follow. It's the equivalent of getting off the superhighway and driving down a dirt road, which is why it's a major deviation from the rules that everybody else is following. And so when Nathanael hears this call and saying, we found Jesus, we found the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, it kind of threw him for a loop. Following, later on in John's Gospel, Jesus will say, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now we've kind of misunderstood that a little bit in the sense that we have taken where Jesus says, I am the way, and turned it into Jesus is in the way. So in other words, it's like a person is trying to find their way to God, and they're going down the road to find their way to God, and Jesus steps out from behind a tree and says, you got to fight through me first. That's the way sometimes we have presented that. That's not what he's saying. He's not saying I am in the way. He says I am the way. That he's calling people to follow him as the one road that leads straight to the heart of God. His way is the way to God and God's mission. And so we've too often defined the rules of Christian faith in terms of what we believe about Jesus instead of focusing on actually following him. We've turned it into a head trip. We want to make sure we believe the right things in the right way and doing what, and instead of actually following him, we've turned it all into about a religion. Information is important, but imitating Jesus is really the heart of discipleship. Doing what he says is really the heart of discipleship. And the only way we can really know what he's about is by going all in, by pushing down the accelerator and following him. And that's what he's calling Nathanael to do. Which leads to the second rule. First one's follow. The second rule is come. Come and see. Philip responds to Nathanael's skepticism when he says, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Philip says, well, come and see. That's what Jesus is about. Come and see what Jesus is about. Philip doesn't try to argue, but instead he invites Nathanael to come and to meet the rabbi himself. So when Nathanael puts a stop sign, Philip sees a green light. Philip knew that his skeptical friend would respond best to an invitation, which is the same invitation that Jesus had given to Andrew and Peter. First met them, and they say, Rabbi, where are you staying? And he says, come and see. Nathanael accepts the invitation to come and see, and to his amazement, finds out that Jesus already knows him. We're all invited to follow one who already knows everything there is to know about us. We can't hide anything from God. We can't hide anything from Jesus. He knows everything about us. So when we come to Jesus and when we invite others to come and see, we know that he's already there to come and live with us. We don't take Jesus anywhere. He's already there. We don't push Jesus out of any place. We can't do that. He's already there. He goes before us. And he's already leading us on the way. And so we're just inviting people to come and see. Philip will become a great evangelist because he sees everyone as simply needing an invitation and will spend most of the rest of his life on the road inviting others to come and see. Come and see for yourself who Jesus is. It's not come and join my religion. It's not come and believe certain things necessarily. It's come and meet Jesus. Who can you invite to come and see? We sometimes don't want to do that because we're so afraid. Well, they may ask some question I don't know the answer to. That's okay. It's not a quiz. The issue is just simply saying, come and see. Come and see for yourself. And so the third rule is see. First one's follow, second one come, third one see. Jesus says you will see greater things than these. Nathanael was amazed that Jesus knew him. And if that in itself was amazing, Jesus told his new disciple that he hadn't seen anything yet. Just the fact that he said, I saw you under the fig tree. The rest of John's gospel reveals the amazing things. He said, if you're amazed by that, you will see greater things than these. And the rest of John's gospel tells us what those amazing things are. Those who accepted his invitation, who witnessed his healings and his exorcisms and his miracles and the transfiguration and especially his resurrection from the dead, those are all amazing things beyond just him knowing us. So following Jesus is a ticket to a wild ride with a lot of twists and turns. It's not safe to follow Jesus. It's not going along and making sure that life turns out smoothly to follow Jesus. It is a wild ride and you got to hold on. Later in the gospel, Jesus tells his disciples that even those miraculous things that they saw him do is nothing compared to what they were going to do when he was gone. Jesus tells them, very truly I tell you, the one who believes in me will also do the works that I do, and in fact will do greater works than these, because I'm going to the Father. I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father will be glorified in the Son. If in my name you ask me for anything, I will do it. So those who accept the challenge of following Jesus and the invitation to come and see have the potential to do the things that Jesus did. In fact, that's our job. That's our mission as we're making disciples, is to do the things in the world that he would do. But a lot of Christians are content to only do what they can do in their own strength. They follow the rules that are easiest to obey and take only the roads that are clearly marked and safe and smoothly traveled. And they say, well, I don't want to go off in that area. I don't want to do those kind of things. I think we can only do what I can do. But the disciples of Jesus learned that following Jesus is actually a journey that's filled with strange and exciting opportunities to rewrite the rules of the way that things currently work in the world. It's an invitation to run off the map and to forget the self-imposed rules that keep us and those around us from experiencing the true and abundant life. There are rules to every skill that we want to learn. We all have to obey the rules for whatever it is we want to do in our lives. And joining in the life of discipleship is a much wilder ride for a much greater purpose. God, who called you to work with him, strengthen you by the power of his Spirit, that you may be worthy of his calling. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be among you and remain with you always. Amen. The worship is ended. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.